It is my great pleasure to introduce Juan Dominiquez from Arup, who has been working on a green Grangetown project, which is actually one of our projects the students analyze in the module Analysis of Precedent in Masters of Architectural Design. So most of you have been to see the project last week. We had a walk through that. Some people are just guests who wanted to join. I'm just letting you know this meeting is being recorded, and in case Juan will confirm the recording, it will be put online. But please, if you can, your connection allows, don't have problem with that, please show your faces, and please make sure you always mute yourself. So Juan, you are co-host, so if you can you just yeah, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Marie. Thank you for inviting me, and thanks everyone for joining. I guess I'll start just introducing myself a bit. So I am I work as a senior landscape architect for a company called Arup. They are based in Cardiff. They are based in Cardiff Bay, but we got offices all in across the UK and in many parts of the world. So it's quite a big multidisciplinary company. And I work as a landscape architect as part of the placemaking team. So we are about 10 landscape architects and 10 urban designers working between what we call the West. So it's basically Cardiff, Bristol, and Belfast. So I've been working in Arup for probably 7 years now. And I actually came across this project in 2014, 2015. But it actually was a project that started quite a few years before, just from the mind of one of the residents. His name is Ian Tintington, and basically he's also a council officer, and he started with this idea because he was a resident and because he was a drainage engineer. So he started with this back in 2010. And I only joined it in 2015 when we started with the feasibility studies, and when the Cardiff Council kind of employ us to work on this project. So I'm going to then start the presentation. So hopefully, I think I need to share my screen.
Yes, I made you co-host, so you should be able to share your screen with the green button on the middle in the bottom.
Right.
Bottom, it's the share button. Green one.
I have to apologize in advance because my computer, for some reason, is playing a bit today, and then it's not. Sometimes it gets stuck. I think it might be because the presentation is quite heavy on graphics. So just bear with me because it might take some time to load the presentation on the screen. It's just loading, but
no worries, take your time. It's
just,
unless you want to send it to me. If you struggle with computer, you can send it to me, and I can be showing the presentation.
Yeah, it's quite heavy. It's more than a gigabyte probably, so it might take
Okay.
some time to send it. Yeah. I don't know. I wonder whether Marie, you want to give a bit of because to be honest, I haven't read too much about what this curse is. You know, the master model you're working on is about. Is that something specific from the project that you actually looking into, or is just in general?
You know, it is this is module analysis of precedents that is overall for all Masters of Architecture Design program. But this module collaborates with different units, and we have 4 different units, and actually we picked precedents that are relevant for the units. And your project is relevant for my unit called Synergetic Landscape, where we work together with Community Gateway project. We are trying to support ecosystem within Grangetown. So the students will be doing some landscape interventions and trying to generate biocorridors across the city. And they will be trying to generate public engagement and actually designing the prototypes of, for instance, insect hotel or something like that. And they will engage the public to DIY them, and also engage circular economy. So there should be token economy, like an app for token economy, so you can gain tokens for making the bug hotel. In the same time, actually, the pollinator can get tokens for pollinating your tomato because you want the tomato. So we are trying to include entire ecosystem within sort of a regenerative community that is not addressing only human beings.
Okay, no, that's interesting. Yeah, I'll be able to talk about the the ecology and biodiversity aspect and things we've tried to do to kind of encourage that. So I think you can see my presentation now,
Yes.
right?
Yep. Yes.
Good. Okay, so I guess just as a quick agenda, I was thinking like I'll go through an introduction, ambition, a bit of the feasibility study, community engagement, concept and detailed design, construction, sustainability, and then lessons learned and Q&A. But I think this is quite a long presentation. So what I want is like people to really stop me whenever you want and have a question, because otherwise I think at the end might be too much and you might forget about those questions. And I think it's probably more appropriate to actually talk about all those whilst I do the presentation. So please stop me at any time. We can talk about anything and try to answer any questions. And then at the end, we can have another Q&A. But also what I would like is like if anyone has been there and has any thoughts on how to improve the scheme, those will be very welcome, because we set this as a pilot project. So we always, and the client was quite keen and quite prescriptive about saying about like, this is a pilot project. We know it's not going to be perfect. There's going to be a lot of errors, and we wanted to learn from it to try to deliver these in other parts of Cardiff and other parts of Wales. So this is almost like, so we know there are things that work and we know there are things don't work. So don't worry about like mentioning things don't work and mentioning things that you would have done differently or improve, because that's something very valuable for us. Okay, so I'll start now.
We are also very happy to share that. We are also, of course, very happy to share the students' analysis at the end with you, what will be within this module.
Okay. So Grangetown, for those who don't know it, is basically is a ward within Cardiff Council and is at the southwest end of the council, as you see in the screen. So basically, there's about 20,000 residents, and the area we're going to be looking at is about 550 properties. So this is a graphic that shows the kind of the area that we've been focusing on. And it's basically 550 properties, 12 streets, and we have about 4.2 hectares of surface water, excluding roofs, because we're not counting the water comes from the roofs. So if you put that on top, probably it'll be even more. So what is the problem? How this has started? So this has started, as I said, from a resident and a local councillor that realized that at the moment, so Grangetown is very close to the River Taff, as you know, and at the moment, all the surface water is basically conveyed into the sewers, and basically is pumped 8 miles away to the Barry wastewater treatment works through 2 pumping stations, and then is treated on Barry and then pumped again into the sea. So as you would know, like there's a lot of energy spent on pumping the water, and that is an efficiency. That's not very efficient. So that's unsustainable drainage, and this is the kind of the starting of the project. What are the key drivers? So there are 3 main key drivers. So regeneration is one of them. So making a more attractive urban landscape, community cohesion, health and well-being, safer public areas, and placemaking. But as well, is the green space and trees. So making a space that is also good for habitat creation, climate control, and improved air quality. And all of this is obviously, as I mentioned earlier, this started as a water management. So that's one of the key drivers as well. And the water management element encompasses different aspects. One is, the pure hydraulics, but then we have also education, educating people about water, the importance of water, the value of water, and how, water, surface water can be, and its quality can be improved locally and right at the site, rather than having to, pump it and treat it far away. So these are the 3 main key drivers, and as such, we have 3 main key partners on this project. One is the local authority, Cardiff Council, which is also highway authority and is the lead local flood authority, and they are the ones that kind of kick-started this project. But then, in order to deliver this project, they had to partner with obviously the water company, in this case Welsh Water, because they're also the sewage undertaker. So they own the sewage, so it's their asset. So if you want to do anything on any sewage pipes, etc., you need to get Welsh Water permission. So having them as a partner is the benefit, because obviously they are on board, and you don't have to actually be almost like fighting for for things. And then Natural Resource Wales, they are the environmental regulator and consenting authority. So they're the equivalent of environmental agency in England, but just for Wales. And their responsibility for the aquatic environment and the risk management authority as well. So these are the main partners. And then in terms of the design process and integration, it has been a truly multidisciplinary project that involved very many different disciplines. We've been appointed as lead consultants, designers, Arup, and within Arup we had to use different disciplines. Water engineering and landscape architecture have been the main 2. So I've worked hand in hand with my colleague Chris Ellis, which was the water engineer on the project. I was the landscape lead. But then we had to consult also with other disciplines, like mainly transport, highways, structural engineering, and geotechnical. And together with that, we had, as well as the 3 main partners, we had other stakeholders, Sustrans, one of the main ones, community funding resources, and residents. Obviously, the most important stakeholder in any project are always residents, and the police, just to name a few. So what is the vision? The vision was to make Green Grangetown an exemplary scheme for sustainable drainage in Cardiff, Wales, and beyond. So it was a pilot, as I mentioned earlier, to encourage greater partnership with the public, private, and third sectors. So combining both their expertise and funding. So the partners I talked about earlier, they were partners, but also funders. So they did have funding available to deliver these projects. So the funding came from the three partners together. So the vision is also to enhance the visibility of water. So and basically change the perception of rainwater as an asset. So typically in typical engineering, drainage engineering, you're trying to hide water in pipes. But we want to change that kind of perception from the public and say, look, water is an asset. Let's put it on surface and let's celebrate it, and let's see how much it can give us in terms of benefits. And we'll talk about those benefits, later in this presentation. Project timeline, as I said, like I started in 2015, but these ideas started back in 2008, and there was a lot of debates, a lot of, I guess, convincing from especially Cardiff Council, but specifically this person, Ian, who was the main, again, leader from the Cardiff Council side. So it started in 2008 and went through a process of, engaging feasibility, more engagement, and then design, again, more engagement, detail design, construction, and it was built in 2018. So as you can see, it's almost like a 10-year timeline. Feasibility. So one of the first things that was commissioned was a feasibility study. And this was in 2013, so I wasn't involved back then. But what is interesting about this feasibility study is that, and you'll see later, is that it kind of sets the tone for the scheme, and it gives you an idea of what is possible and what's not possible. But you can see later that we have actually detoured completely from some of the feasibility findings, because things we kind of realized along the design process, and by engaging with the public and getting more feedback. So we had obviously everything starts with a very in-depth context analysis of the site. Originally, the site was going to be much bigger, so it was including also the upper part of Grangetown. But then, after doing quite a few tests and hydraulic modeling, it was decided that the first phase 1 of Grangetown was going to be just this one in red, and that's what's been delivered. So now, phase 2 is something they have in their minds for the future. But this is just a very quick diagram showing, highlighting what are the constraints on site, what are the existing accesses, and then what are the opportunities that we can see as quick wins, and we're just highlighting those and mapping them in a plan. So then from that, you start with the general concept. Obviously, the general concept is about greening the site, but there are different elements and different geometries. So we have some very wide streets, but we have some much narrower ones. We have some very long corridors, and then we have some much smaller streets. We have dead ends, and then we have through streets. So all of that has to be embedded into the concept. So at feasibility, and that's what I wanted to show you. At feasibility, originally they were thinking of actually conveying the water in the middle of the streets. So, and that was, if you think about it, it would probably be an obvious kind of idea, because it will mean that you maximize the amount of space and the amount of green space by putting it in the middle and putting the cars on the side. And through the feasibility, there was a lot of hydraulic modeling and costing, and then we did also sphere analysis, which is an Arup in-house tool for sustainability analysis. So we have, we did these studies for each of the options. So we have different types of option for each street. Another option would be to have the rain gardens on the sides rather than on the middle. So those options were kind of analyzed. But what is interesting about the feasibility is that they soon find out that this option was not feasible, because the current camber of the road meant that the water was draining towards the sides of the road. So if you wanted to actually make the water draining naturally through gravity to the middle, you have to basically change the camber of the road, and that would mean a lot of digging. And these streets are Victorian streets, so they are very old and they have a lot of old services underneath that you probably don't want to disturb too much. Otherwise, you will start, causing a lot of potential problems. So this option was very quickly identified as not non-viable, not feasible. So that's why it's so important to have and produce feasibility studies and not just jump straight into one idea. You need to test what is possible first. So if we go now into the challenges, some of the main challenges that are on on the site. So this is, I mean, in this presentation, there is obviously a lot of slides about landscape, but there's also a lot about engineering. So this presentation is the one that I used to do with my colleague Chris, who is an engineer. So he will describe these things. So I'm going to just touch base on those, but I'm not an engineer. So I probably don't have, as much knowledge as an engineer will have. But what this shows is like in Cardiff, in some streets, especially Victorian streets, there are like existing what they call brick egg sewers that are from back in the Victorian times. So there are sewers that were built in maybe 200, 250 years ago. They were made of bricks with an X shape because of obviously the kind of the geometry and the strength of that geometry to be strong enough to not fall apart. So these are very sensitive infrastructure, which it has happened in the past that due to works, some of these brick extras have been disturbed, and as such have caused a lot of problem and a lot of money for the water authority to repair them. So you don't really want to break any of these because it could cause a lot of problems. And so this was one of the constraints, having to provide a drainage system that make us having to dig very close to this existing infrastructure is a problem. We have also some substations on site. So substations like this one have a lot of cable connections. So those services are ones that we have to be aware of. So that's a challenge as well, like making sure that we know where the services are and making sure that our proposals don't clash with those services. Because we are proposing a lot of planting, a lot of trees that they're not just what you see on surface. They have a very big root systems that go underneath. And what you don't want is to get some of these roots clashing with some of these very important infrastructure services. And another challenge is the geometry. As you can see, like we have different geometries. We have some narrow streets, which as narrow as 8 meters, and they have traffic, so they get cars in and out. So you have to work with that, and it's quite challenging. And then we have some other streets we have that's much wider, much easier to work with, and that's something that we have to obviously on the design think about, because we always thought these are the streets where we can maximize benefits. Other challenges we find was, parking. Back in the day when you ask people, like everyone thought like parking was an issue. It was an issue because there wasn't enough, but also it was an issue because people were parking all over the place and causing a lot of health and safety issues. As you can see here, you have a disabled person having to actually, go on the road with the risk that entails, and that was because of traffic management wasn't great at the time. So that was something we had in mind, not just the traffic management, but also the perception of people of not having enough parking was very important. And I'll talk about that later. As you can see, existing infrastructure, it wasn't very great. A lot of it was damaged. A lot of the trees were, not maybe in the best condition around the pavements, and that's because they were planted back in the day just on a very small tree pit, without any thoughts about how much those roots will extend. And what that happens is that this tree becomes an issue for pedestrians and cyclists and disabled people trying to walk a lot across these footpaths. So that was something we identified some main challenge. And then the topography, we have to understand like all of these sustainable drainage is based on gravity. So we are trying to reduce the expense on energy consumption of the pumping stations by using the energy that we have for free, which is through gravity. So with water drainage, when you have a good difference in level, it's very easy to work because you can move water from higher spot to a lower spot. That's easy. But when it's very flat, it's much more difficult and challenging. And this is what happened in Grangetown. It's a very flat area. So that's what, as you can see here, is from high point to low point, in some places only half a meter. So making sure that you move water at the velocities that you need for the hydraulic model to work was something that we knew was going to be challenging. But as well as challenges, there are a lot of opportunities, and we always thought, the opportunities are providing a lot of multi-benefits. And I think this is one of the things that I probably contributed the most, because originally this project was conceived as a purely sustainable drainage. But then when landscape came along, we kind of started unveiling, identifying those opportunities for other benefits that maybe were not thought or identified before. So we've talked about sustainable water management, but then again, this is the hectares of impermeable water that we are removing from the site. But then placemaking obviously is an obvious one at the moment, or at the time. Grangetown maybe was lacking a bit of placemaking. The spaces were not very well laid out or suited for community engagement and amenity. So we thought there was a huge opportunity to make the spaces better for the public, and placemaking was an obvious one. Water and air quality, again, we knew like we could improve water quality, but then by having more trees and planting, we knew like air quality was another one as well. Health and well-being, an obvious one. There's a lot of research. At the time there wasn't that many, but nowadays there's a lot of research that like that tells you that having a green space near your house, or even seeing greenery from your window, will improve your health and well-being, especially in terms of mental well-being. Another time that was very much lacking in this area of Cardiff. So health and well-being was a big one. Ecology and biodiversity. Again, we always thought about like that as a very important one. I'll talk about that later, but pollinators, creating habitat for insects, creating smaller spots for that could bring more biodiversity to the site. It's not just obviously through only pollinators, but it's trying to use plant species that are native, but that also could bring that added value to biodiversity. Engagement, and education, that was another main benefit. We knew like we had to engage a lot to get this project through, because there was a lot of people that wanted the project to happen, but there were also quite a good number of people that were very concerned about things like parking, and they weren't very keen really on changing their streets. So because they couldn't visualize what we were trying to do. So that engagement was very, very important. And we had many different public consultations that went through. So we knew that and education were going to be benefits, because the project will educate future generations of residents that will understand water management much better. So I guess I was going to maybe play this video very quickly. It was a video that was commissioned by Cardiff Council at the time as part of that community engagement effort to show basically what what they're trying to do, because a lot of residents were they were confused. They didn't know like what it meant. So this video was done for that reason. So I'll try to play it.
In the worst case, you can pop the link to the chat, and maybe
Yeah.
in the worst case, if it's not playing or playing, could you please pop out the link to the chat so the students can access it later?
Yeah, I think it's playing now, but can you see
Okay,
it?
good. Yeah, we are not hearing the sound, unfortunately. I think this
Sorry.
you have chosen to share your screen. That you have to click on share
All right.
share sound.
Okay, that's fine. To be honest, I'll put the link maybe because otherwise I run out of time. So
Yeah, we might run out of time as well. Pop the link into chat. It will be great. So everybody
yeah,
can see it.
yeah. Okay. Let me see if I can.
Chat is next to the share screen. Chat button.
Yeah. I'm just trying to.
Front view. You can just put the end of the talk.
Yeah, I'll put it at the end. I'm just trying to show the presentation. Don't know what's happening. It's again stuck. Let me see if I can solve this.
Yeah.
You can see it now, yeah?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Okay, so yeah, as I mentioned earlier, well, the video was just to show what kind of level of a work Cardiff Council went into to try convince people, and then this is just an example of the consultations that went on. We had different consultation events where we show early stage concepts, where we show some of the planting and the materials that we were trying to propose, and then we run like surveys within those public consultations to get people give feedback on what materials, what planting do they want for their streets, etc. And with that feedback, it helped us to refine the designs. So it was a very very important element of the project. Again, showing. I think something like this is very important because the residents didn't know like what an engineering tree pit means. I mean, what does it mean to have a tree? Is that going to be is it going to affect my basement? No, because these are going to be completely lined and it's complete the water is just going into a downpipe. So that was something very important to do. As I mentioned, the engineering tree pits, explaining this to the public was very very important. Yeah, and the wall is a rain garden. So again, as part of the community engagement, we had planting days where we took, residents and the public and even schools to come along and plant. We have days where we show, boards showing, about scheme. So and graphics. We had to use a lot of graphics to try, show people what we're trying to do. So this is just some examples. I'll go very quickly through them, but these are just some examples of what we try to do. So in terms of the design, going back to the design, so as I showed earlier, we started as a feasibility study. As you can see, we kind of detour completely from that, and then we had different options which had to be tested. Some of them were much more rigid and maybe more linear. Some of them were more kind of organic. And we took these options to the public. We ran through them, through different stakeholders. We had feedback from everyone, and ended up refining those options in various stages and getting to an option where we kind of try to deal with all the different constraints. And one of them, the major one, being parking. We had to hit a specific number of parking spots because otherwise the residents, wouldn't be very happy because their perception was they were losing all the parking. So, working around parking and around how you make sure that access for cars was embedded was very important, because have to also use all the vehicle tracking to make sure that cars could go in and out without causing any problems. And another element that was very challenging is trying to convince traffic engineers to change their highways standards, because highways standards are quite constrained about what you can and what you can't do. And we kind of convinced them to maybe relax some of those constraints, because this was worth it really in these scenarios. So this is just an image showing what the preferred option was, and it was taking rain gardens to the sites, but making sure that where you have properties fronting, you had enough parking spaces for each property. But where we have properties backing, where you don't have an entrance, like here and here in those two corners, you can have much larger rain gardens. So, and as I mentioned, this preferred option is based on the existing camber of the road. The camber of the road makes that the water goes from a high point in the middle towards the sides, and that means that we didn't have to dig the whole road. And that was very important in terms of cost saving and in terms of making sure the project was viable. So that's why we ended up with this preferred option. Again, this is showing that in a bit more detail. As I said, where we fronting properties, we kind of try to optimize the rain garden space, but also keep a number of parking. Also, disabled parking was something we have to keep on, because some of the properties have disabled days. So we have to make sure they were kept. That's why probably we didn't have a rain garden here, for instance. But then we have much larger areas of rain gardens where we didn't have properties fronting. And another element, as I mentioned earlier, like if you the layout of these streets that came basically through there, they were much wider. So one of the things we tried to do with these was trying to reduce the traffic speeds to make it more safer for pedestrians and cyclists. And what we did is we tightened the geometry of the streets. So making it tighter means that the cars will go slower, and they will try to be more aware of what's happening, because they know they don't have plenty space. They have a constrained space. So that's what we work on that kind of basis. So this is just showing a quick screenshot from the dead end areas. So quite a few of these streets have dead ends. So again, that's another challenge, because it means that the cars have to turn, and you have to provide enough space for turning, and at the same time you have to provide parking. But we thought there was a huge opportunity for placemaking in these dead end areas, would be areas for people to gather in. At the moment they were quite grey. There wasn't any really facilities, and we thought, let's give something to people here, not just greenery, but spaces where they could sit, spaces where they could gather around, spaces where they could park their bikes, etc. But again, keep that facility of sustainable drainage by having very large rain gardens that convey water from a very large areas of impermeable surface. As just an example, one of the challenges also we face is sometimes people don't want amenities in their streets because they think they attract antisocial behavior. So we have to work against that. Not against, we have to work with the public, convincing them if you make a place nicer, it will change attitudes, and people will start behaving much better, and it will give them a better possibilities to develop. So this was just a drawing showing those dead ends. And then we have the Taff Embankment as one of the main key areas. The Taff Embankment, as you know, it runs along the Taff Trail. It's part of a national cycle route, but it's also part of a long distance, the most used long distance footpath in Wales, which takes you from up in Wrekin Beacons all the way down the bay. So this is a very important route for community users, so people that use this on the weekends for recreation, but it's also very important for commuters. Commuters from all over Cardiff go through this route to get to the bay to work. So we knew that, and we knew at that time, that route was not making justice really to the importance, because it was full of cars parked on both sides. The pavements weren't great. There was not full inclusivity, so there were a lot of issues, and we knew we had to challenge that, to change that. So we started testing different options, like what if we take car parking from one side, what if we take it from both, what if we change the direction from two, in terms of being a two-way, being just a one-way. And we test this with the transport team and with the transport modelers, and ended up with a quite an unconventional solution, which was keeping both ways, because otherwise it will be quite problematic in terms of traffic modeling for other parts of the city. Keeping both ways, but narrowing the streets and the actual space for cars so much, up to from 2 to 2.2 meters, so very narrow them visually with the center reservation, so cars will feel they don't have a lot of space, and they will suddenly slow down and make these what we call a cycle priority street. So this kind of example is based on similar projects they've done in similar concepts they've done in a lot in Holland and Denmark. So it wasn't done in Wales yet, but we had, through a lot of testing, we kind of convinced the client and also the public that was the right solution. Again, that was about parking. So we had to show how that looked to convince people, and that was just a graphic trying to show the before and after of what that means. Again, one of the other thing that was important is try to make. So we had a footpath along the Taff Embankment that had a curb running just adjacent to these tree trunks. We knew that it was very constrained, but we knew, as well as giving an infrastructure for cyclists, we had to give infrastructure for pedestrians and disabled. So our solution was to extend the pavement, but also raise it to kind of hide the level issues of the tree roots. The issues around the tree roots. So we will hide them and level the whole surface. And what we did is we used a special surface called KVI FlexiPave, which is fully permeable, and it means that it actually allows the water to filter through and give some local, water to those trees, which we didn't have before because they were just fully tarmac. So that was the solution we came with. Along that, we also thought, we want to make this space as pedestrian feel as possible. And to do that, we have to provide more crossings, because at the moment, there weren't many. So crossings and dealing with junctions was also a very important side. So this is just an example of how we dealt with a junction. We had to get advice for transport, because here you have to accommodate vehicles, you have to accommodate pedestrians, and you have to accommodate cyclists. And you have to accommodate cyclists going from off-street cycling to on-street cycling. So that transition is quite important. And rather than doing a more smooth one, we were advised to actually have a more kind of 90-degree transition because of health and safety, to make sure the cyclists will kind of stop and look before getting into the road. So things like that shows, how, we had to integrate and get advice from other disciplines to make sure the project was, fully integrated. So fully coordinated. Planting design was a very long process. We started by doing a planting selection. We use a software called Plant Partner. I think you can. I'm not sure if it's free or not. It might not be free, but it's not very expensive. But basically, the software which allows you to select planting based on different parameters, and you have, you know, um, um, resilience, hardiness, water consumption, suitability for every environment. You have all these different parameters. So we start in selecting the planting based on the parameters that we needed for this scheme. Obviously, we knew we wanted biodiversity value, so we choose species that have a high biodiversity value that were good for bees and pollinators. We knew rain gardens are quite special environments because a lot of people think, rain gardens are very humid and they have a lot of water, but actually they are designed to drain very quickly because the soil media is very sandy. So it's not just standard topsoil. What we specified is a very sandy type of soil that will make the water filter through very quickly. And because of that, they dry very quickly. So in the summer, they could be very, very dry. So the planting that you select has to do well in wet environments, but also dry environments. And that was quite challenging because, there are not a lot of plants that are able to do that. And, so that was another one. One was also keeping an idea around color interest with seasonal changes. So making sure it's not just how the planting looks in day one, it's how it looks through the seasons. And if you have a planting that looks good for 2 months, but then dies back completely and leaves a very big empty space, it might be okay if you do it, outside the city center, in the nature. But if you do it in the residential street, people are gonna start complaining because their perception was different. So we have to manage that balance and try to find a species that give that full year, not just the species, but the mix and the way we made the planting layout had to make sure that there was always some interest, some color. There was always some benefit, biodiversity for pollinators or for different insects or amphibians. So that was another very important aspect. And then, it's also about architecture. Planting are architectural elements on the street. So we have to think about the shapes, the volumes, and how do they relate to the existing geometries and the architecture and the history of the site. So all those things we had to take into consideration. So I'm not going to go through all of these because it's probably a lot of information, but we set out these parameters and we use software to kind of refine those planting selection. And then we went out to the public. We showed that, and also we went out to people like the landscape officer at Cardiff Council, landscape officers in NRW, and we got advice from them. So through all that feedback, we kind of refined that planting list into what ended up being the final planting list. So I guess here what we show is there's two main elements to this project. One is what is above ground, what you see, and the other one is what is below ground. So a lot of people don't see what's below ground. Below ground is a series of pipes that basically connect the water. So the water basically drains from the road and the pavements into these rain gardens through gravity. And then from the rain gardens, it goes into a central pipe that takes the water down into another pipe and then into an outfall to the river. So that is something that the public may not perceive. So we have to explain that and show it, with graphics. So again, the brick sewer, how we overcome this problem, because we have to put drainage through a street that had a brick sewer. So to do that, our drainage engineers created a siphon, which was basically in a pipe that goes underneath the brick sewer. And that was, if you imagine, building these without touching the brick sewer was very, very challenging. They had to create a very specific construction method to make sure that everything wasn't, so that the brick exterior wasn't affected. Construction details. I mean, again, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but we had to go through obviously detailing everything, because what we did is like we produced a package of detailed drawings, hand it over to the contractor. The contractor then takes those and build them. So you have to give them enough information so they don't come back with a lot of questions after that, or they don't do something that you don't want them to do. So this is an example of a dead-end rain garden and how it works. So basically, it has an inlet which distributes the water through gravity in a kind of level channel. And then from the channel, it's got different inserts that makes the water going into and spread the water through the planting. Because one of the main problems with rain gardens is a lot of the times you get the water getting into the inlet, and basically most of the water stays there. And that creates a problem by making an area with a lot of water and moisture and a lot of scouring, and then the water may not reach the other parts of the rain garden. So we had to make sure the water will reach the whole rain garden. And to do that, we created this channel, kind of deep channel solution. And again, it has an underpipe, an underground pipe where the water will filter through, get into the pipe, and out into that main pipe that runs through the middle of the scheme. But you have to also think about maintenance. What happens if one of these pipes blocks? That's where you build something like this. This is a rodding point. It means like it's an area where you can access the pipe with a rodding, so a cable, to clean it in case it gets blocked. So, maintenance, again, is something very important to think beforehand through your design. Again, more construction details. Very importantly, on this project, one of the main things we did probably differently from most landscape projects to date at the time in Cardiff was making sure that each tree will have enough soil to establish, but also live through, all the life expectancy of that tree, 25, 50 years, and be very, healthy and have enough soil volume. So for that, we established a number of minimum soil volume per tree. Typically was around 12 cubic meters. And basically what happens is, like in some areas, as you would imagine on the streets, if you have a very large rain garden, you might have that volume. But in some of the smaller ones, you don't have that volume. So you have to make sure that that volume, that the tree can access that volume underneath the highway and underneath the pavement. And to do that, you have to create a system with root cells that allow that to happen. Because the tree, if you plant a tree surrounded by compacted ground, the roots will find it difficult to go through it, and eventually the roots will not use that soil, will not utilize that space. To utilize that space, you have to have uncompacted soil. And to create uncompacted soil in what is a compacted surface, we need to come up with this solution, which was using root cells. The root cells will make sure that you can have a surface on top, like a highway or pavement, that's fully compacted, and you can have a lot of load and weight on top, but make sure that the soil in the root cells is actually loose soil, and the roots could go through. So this is a drawing, just shows how the root cells work. It's basically plastic cells with voids where the soil goes in, and I'll show you photos later of that. But that was, that was very important. And a lot of the times, the issues with trees is that they are planted in very small tree pits, 1 by 1 meter. Just 1 cubic meter of soil is not enough for a tree to establish and to survive through the years. And that's what happened to some of the trees in the Taff Embankment. They didn't have enough soil. The roots started to go up, and they started to then break the pavement and causing a lot of problems. We didn't want that here, and that's why we created this detail. The other important element about this detail is, making sure that the tree has also enough air. So we have air ventilation, so the soil didn't, have enough oxygen within it for a healthy, free root system. Also, the whole of these tree pits are completely lined, so they have an impermeable liner all around them and make sure that any water that gets in doesn't go away. It basically gets into the tree pit and it moves from the tree pit into a perforated pipe. And then from the perforated pipe, it goes out. But it doesn't go beyond that. And that was very important to explain people that all these tree pits is completely and fully lined. The water doesn't go anywhere outside them. And that was very important to show and convince the clients. The other element that's important.
I can interrupt you. Is there also the reason because we heard that the soil in Grangetown is very polluted? That also cause environmental issue?
Yes. So is the soil contamination is one issue. Then you have also soil compaction, and then the soil type. So some soil types are good for like permeability, and basically you can even use them as soakaways. Like water goes there, and then within time it will basically percolate through and then go into deeper layers of the soil. But what happens in made ground that is being made from many years ago, is that that's not the case. Typically, it's contaminated, it's very compacted, and it's not very permeable. And that's what happens in Grangetown, and that's what happens in most of the schemes. You will retrofit green infrastructure, you will have that problem because you imagine you're retrofitting on top of a highway or pavement that has been compacted. So yeah, that was a project. So all the soil that is used in this project has been imported, has been specifically specified for rain gardens. As I said, like sandy type soil, but it was also, all of it was imported. So we had to make sure that we had a right type of soil with the right type of nutrients, with not too much organic matter, to make sure there was a soil that will work for this species, and it will work also for creating these wildflower meadows, etc. So making sure that, for instance, not having a lot of organic matter is very important to make sure that, some of the species don't overcompete others. So that was quite important. And the other element, to show very quickly on this, is the overflow. Each rain garden is designed for accumulate or have a ponding depth of, in this, it's between 100 and 200 mil. But when that ponding depth is reached, then the water has to go somewhere, and that's where you have an overflow for the water to go into the overflow and get out of the system without causing flooding problems in the street.
And so, if you want to ask something fast, Angela.
Yeah, I was just wondering, since you mentioned there is a new, so there was polluted soil and there was new soil brought into the place. What happened with the polluted soil?
You mean with the soil we took from site? So the soil and any material that you basically remove from site, the contractor removes from site, has to be disposed at an appropriate facility. So I'm not sure where they took it, but yeah, they have to dispose it, and it actually is quite expensive to do that. So a lot of the times in the design, you also try to minimize maybe the amount of waste you create, because it's very expensive for your client to dispose that waste. It costs quite a lot of money. I don't remember the number per ton, but it's quite expensive. So in this case, yes, they had to take any of that out into waste facility where they will treat it and appropriately depending on which contaminants it has.
Yeah, because I was wondering if there is any potential with this kind of, because well, there are some kind of this type of infrastructures that actually are able to treat polluted soil, isn't it? Or perhaps it's just some kind of pollution that they can. Is there any of this applied in this project?
So yeah, I know what you mean. So you mean like you could have treated the existing contamination with perhaps the planting, the rain garden. So yeah. I think that it wasn't possible here because of various reasons. I think some of the contaminants were not suitable for that type of treatment. What we know, or we knew at the time, it was that with the planting, we knew like we could break some of the hydrocarbons. Some plants can break hydrocarbons, and we knew that some plants can also absorb some other contaminants. But then there were some, I believe, that were on site. Like for instance, asbestos. That's something you have to, as far as we know, like there's no planting that can treat that.
Also, the water goes to the river, right? In very short.
Yeah.
Yeah. The thing is that's the thing of it. Like some plants can absorb some of the pollution, and water goes, and also it cleans the pollution. So the water goes clean to the river anyway. But I understand that not all the pollutants in the soil will be possible to be treated that way. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. No, but it's a good question. I mean, it would be great if I guess the existing soil could be reused, because again, that will be more circular economy. But I think at the time it was a risk. Basically, they didn't want to take, and there was a lot. I don't think there was enough information to do that. To be honest, so they went on through the route. Because the other element of these rain gardens is like, as well as treating the contaminants, you need to make sure that the hydraulic model works. So the hydraulic model is based on X amount of water lands on surface, goes on to these rain gardens, and it has to be filtered through and out of the system in a specific time. Otherwise, it's not efficient, or it could cause other problems like more flooding, etc. So the soil has to be, as I said, like quite permeable, and that's why it has to be quite high on sand. And you couldn't do that with existing soil, because I'm sure like it was probably very clay rich. So I think reusing soil on rain gardens is something that can be done, but what you will need is to take the soil and ameliorate it, so to mix it with maybe sand and other elements, to make sure that is the type of soil that you can use in rain gardens. So that's an interesting topic to research, to be honest. But yeah, we didn't do that at the time.
Okay, so just one thing, I think it's really interesting to understand this compromising of all the requirements, and I guess the things that I was talking about perhaps is more possible when you have like a bigger space where the water can be there for longer, and there is like a more time for these processes to occur. So, but there is a very interesting to know what were the constraints of the project. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, that's fine. Okay, I'm not sure how am I doing with time. Is that?
Well, you are already over time, but I mean it's okay as long as you can stay. That's fine for us. Take as much time as you want, as you can.
Yeah, I just go quickly. I mean, so again, that's the detail. I'm just showing here. In some cases we had to go over the rain gardens, and we came up with a kind of a non-standard solution of having a great bridge. Again, this is where you need to convince people, because this is not up to highway standards. So having this on the highway is by all means is not. It was challenging to convince, but I think it ended up being a good solution, and people like it. So I'm just showing some images. I guess that's back on what we're discussing. This is images showing how they. There's various things on this image. One is, as you can see, we came up with a solution where you didn't have to dig up the whole street. That's very important, because it meant that you didn't have to, disturb the whole street and make it much more costly and problematic for residents, because by doing this, residents still can access their properties. So as you can see, they dig the site to create these planters, and then they put the liner. This is an impermeable liner. It's quite a thick, actually, plastic when you attach it. And then they start laying the root cells, and the root cells are, in this case, are from a company called Green Blue Urban. They're very well known in the UK for, providing tree products. And you can stack root cells as much as you want. These, I think, were 250 by 250 mil. So when you have them, laid, you obviously have to create an area for the root ball to go in. A lot of people, design maybe a tree pit, and then don't realize that they actually have to allow for space for their root ball, because the root ball some of them are very big. And in this case, in this specific project, we were very adamant to make sure that the trees that we bring were big, because we wanted to create instant effect. And also we wanted to show people that you can plant big trees and be successful, and they will bring benefits much more quickly, straight away, than maybe some of the smaller ones that are also more easy to vandalize. So that's why you have these holes here, to make sure that the root balls can go in. So, and then, you have the final rain garden with the soil. As you can see, the soil, you can see in here, like, it's not very dark, it's quite sandy. And this is a specific soil, was specified by us with the help of soil scientists, and with the help of this company, Blue Urban. So the soil was almost like a small research to get to that specific product. Again, these are same images, very similar. That here it shows how they install in some other tree pits. A couple of things here. One is, as you can see here, it's important to think about the root ball, because in some cases they realize the trees were too big to get into the tree pits. So there was a lot of work around trying to make them fit. The trees came with a root ball, as you can see. So they're taken from the field, and then they get a root ball wrapped, and then they are planted with a guide system. So basically, this is a series of straps and a wire that goes down and anchors the tree on the ground. And we thought this was the best solution, because you can also anchor trees with the stakes. But the problem with the stakes is that they need someone to go there very often and tighten and make sure they're working. But with these, once this anchor in the ground, actually you don't have to do anything, and it actually works much better for when you have high winds or storms. We tested that with quite a few storms, and the trees didn't move, which was quite a good thing. And here you can see the guy just walking through this rain garden, and that's that pipe you can see there. That's the overflow. So that is almost like equivalent of an overflow in a bathtub. When the water will reach certain height, it will go directly into the overflow to make sure the water doesn't get into the road and causes problems. And lastly, in this image is the bollards. The bollards weren't our idea. We were against bollards because we thought they were going to cause problems. They were going to be very difficult to install. They wouldn't take, because these need quite a big foundation, they were going to take a space from the planting, and they also were going to be very susceptible to breaking, because if you imagine cars parking, and they could potentially move them and break them. And actually, it was proved that it wasn't the best idea. But because of highway standards, we have to put bollards. We didn't manage to convince them not to have them, and it was mainly because when you go from a previous situation of having a highway to a situation where you have a rain garden, you have to warn people. By highway standards, you have to warn people to not, there's something there. Be careful not to, jump into or trip into these rain gardens. So, if I was doing this again, I would try to convince harder not to have those bollards, because they have been a nightmare. And this shows also the level of, I guess, commitment we had also with existing trees. So there were quite a few, not a lot, but a few existing trees. Some of them we managed, a lot of them we managed to keep on some of the wider streets, and you will see that later on the photos, because they have some sentimental value to people that planted them quite many years ago. So we work our designs around that. But some of them were very difficult to keep. And this was one example. And what we did is that we transplanted those trees. So with some big cranes and machinery, the contractors were able to actually wrap the trees and move them to to the park actually, and that was a way of, it wasn't so much about, yeah, it is a tree, but maybe planting a new tree, is more efficient. But it was about saying to the public, look, we care about these trees, and also we know they're important, and these things can be done. So, it's trying to, win the public really. Sustainability. I mean, this was, I guess, this was done a bit like retrospectively, but we started to look at, how the UN SDGs, relate to this project. As you know, there's 17 of them. So we knew that this project could be very high on the delivery of these UN SDGs. And we start, identifying some of those, the obvious ones: good health and well-being, clean water and sanitation, industry and innovation, and infrastructure. Infrastructure, the main one, we created a new infrastructure for cyclists, which will help the economy. Reduce inequality. I think it's a safer place in that, obviously, hopefully will reduce those inequalities, and it's a place that maybe will, bring some more socioeconomic development, which will help with those inequalities. Sustainable cities and communities. Again, obviously making places more sustainable and involved in engaging the community. Climate action. That's kind of an obvious one. Light below water. I guess that's more to do with the water that goes into rivers, and I'll show you some of that later. But the water that goes into the river is cleaner, at least for this specific area. So we hope that sort of helps also some of the river and marine biodiversity, life on land, and then partnerships for the goals. Obviously, we had to partner with different organizations to make these happening. And then the obvious one, the other one, is the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. This was actually presented by a colleague of mine, but as you know, we have this act in Wales, which is quite important and quite forward-thinking and unique. And this is something, we have in mind from the very beginning, in terms of making sure that this project kind of fulfills these specific objectives, and I think it does. And one, I guess, example of that is that the Minister of Wellbeing visited the site, and she has been very, very happy about it, and she has been promoting it a lot. She actually had a TED talk recently where she actually showed the project. So I think we did well in terms of fitting in with this very important piece of legislation in Wales. So results and quantitative benefits so far. This is just some of the facts. As I said earlier, 12 streets, 555 meters of improved Taff Trail, route number 8 of the National Cycle Route, 14 safer junctions, 108 new rain gardens. We included 130 new trees. We're removing 4.2 hectares of surface water from the sewage network. We created 1,700 new square meters of green space with 19 native species of trees, 26 new cycle stands, 4 new outfalls that go into the river, and 10 new benches and seats. That's some of the stats. In terms of more quantitative data, this was a research done by I believe Welsh Water. They started, they did some baseline analysis on, they took quite a lot of data before this project was built, and then they took some after. And they are still working on this quite a lot. So we just have got some hints of what their findings are. And they're only, this is maybe 2 years old, so, or like a year and a half. I'm sure they have much more data now. But just at the time, they show that, the pre-construction and post-construction electricity consumption was, lower, not by a lot at that time, but it was, you can see like, and what this shows is like the system works basically. You take in water from the system into river and reducing the amount of energy you need for pumping. And I think this was based on a very short period. So I'm sure if we got new data now, it would show the difference will be higher. And hopefully we'll get that very soon. So we've used this tool. I don't know if you come across this, but it's called the BEST economic tool, which allows you to assess the economic benefit of green infrastructure. So we use the tool for this project, and the results came out, these savings. So, this economic impact. So the economic impact on health was assessed as £4 million. I understand this is to do with, the future reduction of, people, visiting doctors and because of they're more healthy. And, again, amenity, potential cost and sort of implication and benefit for 4 million because of, more cyclists. We had cyclist counts, and the amount of cyclists that are now using the site as opposed to before is amazing. And those cyclists use that to work, they use it for amenity. So that has an economic impact. Again, we talk about water pumping, recreation. So, air quality, to be honest, I'm not sure how this was assessed, the kind of economic impact, but imagine, by the number of new green infrastructure, you could assess what is the improvement in air quality and how that benefits the health, and that hence what is the cost implication of that. That's a kind of a graphic that was put in there. Again, I'm not sure how they created this, but it seems like there is an impact on air quality. This is just showing. This is more like, I guess, visual than anything. But there was a test done on the water, and just by pure visual assessment, you can see like the water upstream of the rainwater. So getting in the rainwater before getting into the rain gardens was this bottle, and the water collected on the river on the outfalls was these bottles. So you can see at least the amount of suspension, so elements in suspension, has been reduced drastically. And this is on microplastics. So this shows for a Bargate Street, one of the streets before construction and after the construction, you can see the amount of reduction in microplastics on both bottles. I understand, what they did is they measure those microplastics on this bottle and then on this one, and those are the difference. From different types of microplastics. Again, I'm not an expert in microplastics, but I get this is different types of them. And then, I guess for me, the most important thing about a project is then the feedback. You can do a very high-end project that looks very, very nice and is amazing, but then if you don't get real feedback from people, if people don't like it, people don't use it, then maybe you have not succeeded. And what we find here is like, we know we took a lot of compromises. Some of the design, we have to compromise a lot on materials, on finishes, on many things that I would have done differently. But regardless of that, the end result, I think, is always to do with the public and how they perceive it. And we have different quotes now from many different organizations and residents and people saying that, they really like it. So, and this is just some of them. One from Systems Wales, that's a very important one because, is to do with cycling infrastructure. Again, we didn't ask for these quotes. There were, a lot of them were just either, as put in papers that these organizations have done. So that's even, for us, is even better. So quotes from residents. And then I had an email the other day from just a colleague saying, and this is for me, it's even better, just saying, like she was in a course or in a presentation, and quite a lot of people was talking about Grangetown there, and they were raising how exemplary it was and how great it was for them, and how much it has made an impact on their lives. And that's what it's all about, making an impact on people's lives. So I'm going to just very quickly run through images. I'm sure you've seen these, but this is some of the images that we took of the site. So you can see the pollinators, the junctions. Again, there was very, very important. These junctions, a lot of them are made of natural stone. Again, very challenging construction, very challenging to convince people that to use natural stone, because the perception is that they always fail. But if you use the right design, if you have a very strong and robust engineering, you get to a solution that doesn't fail. And actually using natural stone is much better for placemaking and to make the place feel more pedestrian friendly. And this hasn't failed yet, as far as I know, which shows that the engineering and the design is key on making sure that happens. Again, we had a lot of wildflowers, have some annuals, we have a lot of ornamental grasses. One of the most important things, obviously, for local authorities is maintenance. How you will make sure you lower maintenance, and we knew, like, by using ornamental grasses and a naturalistic approach, maintenance will be reduced. And that goes back to the soil. If you use a soil that doesn't have a lot of organic matter, you make sure that a lot of these wildflowers succeed and come up, and they overcompete some of those other grasses that are actually more difficult to maintain, that needs more cutting. This is the idea with this planting, is that it actually only requires one cutting per year. Maybe the wildflowers might require two, but most of these with one cutting per year will be enough. And that, for local authority, is very important. This, again, this is another example of what I meant earlier about the community, and maybe not just doing what you think is best for in terms of your mind and what you think is best for the design, but doing what was best from the community, from their feedback. So I wouldn't do this sitting arrangement ever, but there's a mosque nearby, and we talked with some of the people in the mosque, and they actually told us that, and we've seen that as well. They meet here once a week, all the senior members of the mosque, and they discuss things, and they said to us, look, we would really love to have a place where we can sit, because we can sit together and have our discussions, etc. So we kind of, with them, we kind of co-designed this space, and they like it, because also they didn't want very large benches that were maybe attracting antisocial behavior. So we had quite robust benches, but they were individual, so they're less maybe prone to antisocial behavior. So this is an example of how to design with the public. And so it might not be the nicest place as in terms of visually, but then it actually works for that community, and that's the important thing. Okay, more photos. Cyclists, again, as I said, like this, I don't know the numbers, but the amount of cyclists that use the space now comparing to before, I would say it's at least 10 times at least. These are probably send these later. These are just some slides showing the before and after images that are on the internet. So I'll send those links. It's basically, you can slide and see the before and after, and that was something we use also as a tool for promoting the scheme. So these are some images showing before and after of the project. Very quickly, I'm almost getting there. I think this is one of the last slides. Lessons learned. So we had a lot of lessons learned. I think this is just 6 of them, but we have many other ones. One, early client, contractor, and designer involvement. So one of the issues we had is like the contractor was involved very late on the stage. So I think involving the contractor very early, even though they might not be appointed, but if you involve them from the very early stage, maybe through an early contractor appointment, it will save you a lot later on, redesigning or responding to contractor queries. So that should be always done where possible. Pre-construction survey, do as much and survey as possible. Is never enough. A lot of the times you will find when you start on site, you find new services you didn't realize they were there, and that will cause you a problem. That will mean that you can't plant the tree there, or you can't have whatever you were proposing there. And then, maybe your concept will not work because you haven't done all the surveys you need. So do as many surveys as you need, trial holes, service returns, check with the utilities companies, geotechnical surveys, everything, GIs, everything that you can do it, because it will save you money in the long term. Tree surveys is very important. A lot of the times local authorities or clients think tree surveys are not worth it, but they are very worth it, because a lot of the times you find that some trees maybe have disease, and you have to take them down, or you find that some trees maybe are a risk for people, and so things like that are very, very important. Products, at the time, we had to come up with our own solutions that you can see, you can sort through the presentation. So there are some, so one of the main things is, like, for these rain gardens, they have to be deep. So it's a deep, 400 mil deep. And there wasn't anything on the market, like a deep curb or a deep mini wall that you can use on the rain gardens. There wasn't anything deeper than 250, 300 mil, and we needed 400, 450. So we came up with the idea of using natural stone, granite, because you can cut that to suit. But in the long term, I think probably it was a good solution, but it was quite costly. It had to come from very far away, so very, future leading times. If it was a product that was really available, made of maybe a sustainable material that was 400 mil deep, and you could build as a curb, that will have to help us a lot. There wasn't at the time. So, doing research on products and trying to get companies and manufacturers maybe to do products suited for you, I think that's always very, I think it's very worth it. Community engagement and communication critical at every stage for a successful outcome. I think we've done, this is a lessons learned here, but I think we've done a lot of it, but yeah, it's never enough. The more that you do, the better, because you will get, this project is more than 10 years. If you get the community involved, I can guarantee you reduce the number of years it takes you from concept to completion. And I think that's what happened. As I said, a lot of the people was against the project at the beginning because of the parking. So if we engage them maybe earlier, you might have saved us some time. I don't know. Manage expectations, very important. A lot of the times, not in this project, but in similar projects, we have issues where we show something, a very nice graphics, very nice visuals, and probably really like them. And then when you start implementation, the public are like, oh, this is not what you show us. I mean, so you need to manage the expectations. Try to use maybe images that don't show a lot of detail, that maybe are, and then explain them, look, the planting takes time to establish. It's not like, it doesn't come like from one day to the other. You need time, some of these planters may look better. I didn't show you the photos, but some of these planters look completely empty for months because the plants were planted quite small. Some plants died, have to be replanted. So it was that process. You need to explain that to the community. Otherwise, you'll have people tweeting and making, kind of bad press on the project. But if they know, okay, just wait for a year because this planting is going to take time. If you do that through communication, through having, boards on those planters, things like that, that will help a lot. And then, use the right language. A lot of the times people get scared when you tell them, oh, we're going to plant a tree in front of your house. They are like, oh, this is going to affect my basement. It's going to, cause problems in my foundations. I'm going to have a lot of problems with antisocial behavior and all that kind of things that maybe, some people think as negative. But then if you use the right language, say, this is not just a tree, we're using an engineering tree pit, which is fully lined with root barriers and make sure that, you know, the roots never go up, make sure the water is fully contained and it goes into a pipe that then goes into the river. So using the right type of language is very important for that as well. And yeah, just lastly, we've been through these. The project took quite a few years, but then we won quite a few awards. And as I say, it's not about awards. To be honest, the awards are good because it kind of gives you, you know, a backup for doing more of these. But I think the important thing is that the community are our, you know, our greatest asset in terms of doing this again. And hopefully we'll start phase 2 of Brainstorm, or maybe do another similar project very soon in Cardiff and maybe other councils. So I think it's a pilot scheme that's been successful, and a lot of people is looking at these and they're trying to replicate it in other places. So even if we don't do it, someone else does it. For us, it's a massive success. So and now, I mean, sorry about the lengthiness of the presentation. I think I could talk about for hours, but if you have any questions, feel free
Thank
to.
you. That's
You know,
great that you have some time for questions.
yeah.
That's excellent. May I ask this my question? Because we work a lot with community engagement and co-design with the local communities. Can you talk a bit more about you said the participation in all the stages? Can you talk a bit more? What were the challenges? Did you have any haters, or was it like you started with the problem about parking? What has been the situation within the process, and what is the situation at this moment, and how it has been balancing, and what actions you took to engage the public?
So in terms of engaging the public, typically, so there's two elements. One is the formal public consultations that most projects have to go through to get through planning. This case was different because this is council-owned land, so it doesn't really need planning. So you could actually build these without doing a planning process or a consultation. But they knew, like, you know, they had to do it. So there was formal public consultation events, which we did in various facilities in Grangetown, where we just advertised it, and then people came for a day, and we kind of had the boards, and we explained them the project, and we had questions, feedback, etc. And then we had a lot of informal communication through the media. There was a website set up, there was a Twitter account, but then also, very importantly, during the construction, there was one person from the contractor, which his solely function was he was a community, I think he was a communication and community manager or something. His only function was to respond to public questions, and that was very important to have someone like that. Someone like the public could go and say, oh, you know, maybe because they have a question about something that's going on in front of their street. Because the other element I didn't talk about this is the kind of logistics of the construction and the street closures. That's, you know, as you can imagine, to build here safely, we had to close some of the streets and you know, kind of you know, making sure that people understood when the streets were going to be closed or partially closed, when they can get in, when they can't, and all that was very complex and very important. So that was you know, something that we put a lot of effort. But then in terms of the parking, for instance, that was one of the most like hot topics, and that was like most of the people that was against the project was because of the parking. So what we did was, obviously together with the council, we did a parking survey where we counted, you know, the parking spots that were. We also acknowledged the parking wasn't rationalized. Parking was a bit all over the place. So what we offer the public was saying, look, we're not going to reduce the number of parking spaces. We're just going to make them more efficient. We're going to rationalize the parking. And then also at the moment, a lot of the streets didn't have resident parking. So we told them, we're going to give you 50% of resident parking, and then increase it to 75 and even 100 within X number of years. That we didn't, obviously we did that with the council because we don't have the power to enforce that, but the council agree on doing that as a solution. So we kind of, then by showing the people that we're not actually reducing the total number of car parking spaces, yes, in some streets they were less, but then in some streets there were more. So in general, in total, we were not reducing the number of car parking spaces. We were rationalizing them, and by providing resident parking, because one of the main issues and concerns for the public was like people commuting, going and parking in their streets during the day. But we said, look, if you have more resident parking, that will solve the problem. And so, by doing that, we kind of convinced quite a good number of people, showing those numbers and how the designs work and all that. But then, there were some people that maybe had 3 or 4 cars in one house, and that's very difficult because this is almost in the city center. It's a residential street, low density, well, not low density, so medium density. So, people like that will still, maybe not very happy, but you have to take some compromises. You can't make everyone 100% happy, to be honest.
Thank you so much. Angela raised her hand. Angela, are you still there?
I am, yes. Actually, I was, I mean, this is really, really interesting project. Congratulations. I think it achieved a lot of good things. So I'm just, I mean, I was interested in the slide where you showed the amount of rainfall in 2016 and the one in 2018, and then the amount of electricity used. I guess that's for the sewage from waste Welsh water, which was reduced. And so I just wanted to point out, so this project is not just about, well, as I understand and that slide shows, that is not just about improving the situation as it has been in the past years, but also kind of giving resilience for the future, where we see that there will be greater rainfalls and greater flooding risks, and those numbers showing like double the rainfall than 2 years ago, or even more, and which will have been so a double of electricity used just for the sewage, but also all the risk for flooding, and this project is kind of not only reducing that electricity use, but also reducing a better control of the rainfall and control of the flooding risk. So in that sense, I think this is really interesting. Then some perhaps more, I don't know if it's a critique or just wondering. First of all, the durability of the wooden bollards, because obviously, especially the ones that are integrated in the rain gardens. Obviously, when you have wood directly into the soil, it will degrade quite quickly. So I was wondering about that, whether it has some treatment or something to. And the other question for me is maybe questioning this, the fact that the water that goes into the rain garden that has quite a lot of microplastics, but then when it comes out, it has less, which is good for the output, and is good for the river. But how does it work? And you might not have the answer, as you mentioned that you were not an expert in this kind of pollution, but perhaps questioning the fact that then the microplastics stay in the soil. So soil that you, as you have said, is a new soil that has been brought into the place, substituting polluted soil. But then the soil gets polluted because of the all these microplastics that are coming into the rain gardens. So I don't know if this is something that is considered, whether there is some of these plants. I'm not aware of plants actually removing plastics, but maybe perhaps there are some bags, because there is always discovering new species that kind of can digest plastics or something. So yeah, perhaps these two questions.
Yeah, no, that's really good. So on the last one, on the microplastic, which is the most difficult one, I guess. So this is something we also knew from the beginning, in the way that not just microplastic but all the contaminants. We knew like the soil, depending on how the planting perform and soil media, the soil may become contaminated in the future. So there's different things to look into that. So we knew that may happen, and then so that's why we got someone to research on it. So we have someone, I believe, from Cardiff University looking into. So they took baseline data for different elements, including the soil, and they're looking into that. So how the soil, is performing in terms of that in the contaminants. So hopefully they'll be able to show something on that. But there might be different aspects of that. One is the microplastics might be in the soil, but maybe if they are contained, they're not causing any harm as such, and maybe you can keep the soil. Or it might be that you have to remove the soil or ameliorate the soil in the future. Every 10 years. So this is something we still don't know, because it's quite a new thing. So, but there's people researching on this, and we're very keen to understand it, because it might be that you have to ameliorate the soil, treat the soil, or even completely and fully remove it in 5 years' time. So that's something that hopefully we'll find out more about it, and is indeed very, very interesting. I guess the main benefit of keeping it in the rain gardens is that it doesn't get to the water and then to the fish, which is one of the major problems. Then in terms of resilience, definitely, I think that's very spot on. I mean, resilience was always very important. Obviously, sustainable drainage is about resilience always. It could be in the way of attenuation and reducing flooding, or it could be in the way of cleaning the water. In this case, it's more about cleaning the water, but also some attenuation. But what we find as well in terms of resilience is like for the planting as well is very important. And in terms of biodiversity, we find out that the rain gardens is very good for resilience in the sense of biodiversity. So, for instance, just before we finished the scheme and we planted, we had a very bad winter. It was snow actually. I think it was 2018 or 17, I don't remember. But when we finished the planting, and the full rain gardens were covering in snow just after planting, which is not ideal because the plants are still, trying to establish, and a lot of them got fully covered and frost. We didn't do anything, and they came out and they were fine. But then on that summer, we have one of the driest summer, I think, on record in Wales. And, it was, I don't know, it was 3 months or like 2 months maybe without any rain or very few rain. And they were also still establishing the plants, and we didn't do anything. And we find out because some of the green areas, most of them are rain gardens, but some of them, they're actually not connected to the water. Just a few of them on Taff Embankment because we couldn't, because of the levels, etc. We found out that the rain gardens were performing extremely well, and the plants were surviving well, were green, were fine, whereas the plants on non-rain gardens were actually, some of them died and were scorching, and they had to be replaced because they didn't have enough water naturally. So for the council, that's also very important, because it means they don't have to go and water the planting. It's just done naturally. So resilience in many ways, biodiversity maintenance, etc., is the one that I think this project definitely will help and achieve. And then the bollards, as again, I wouldn't, I wouldn't put them if I do it again, but we had to. And I agree. I mean, when you look at materials, you got timber, but then the kind of alternatives are plastic, metal, which metal gets very damaged very easily, plastic, which doesn't look great, and then you got timber, which is more, I guess, sustainable, more in keeping, etc. And yeah, we use hardwood oak timber, so they are quite expensive bollards actually, from a company called Woodscape, which they apply. They normally they have treatments to their wood, but then they apply some extra treatment for insects, and also for to try and last as much as possible. But yeah, eventually timber will, I guess, within years, it will maybe start decaying. But I think what we thought is like, okay, if we have a timber bollard, that maybe there's something also, it's part of the process, that it gets decomposed within time, and you have to maybe replace it. But no, I agree. It was a challenge.
And so just additional, because you said you probably wouldn't put the bollards, but they told you to, like the
local authority,
will require that. But it was because people weren't used to it, and they might try to park on there. There was the consideration to perhaps have like temporary fences that they can then be removed when the system has been.
Yeah, I think it was to do with basically highways authority, like law, in terms of, in Cardiff at least, any new element that you put on the highway, that is fixed. They put these bollards, and as you can see, they got white and red on one side. So depending on the direction of the cars, you have to. I think red is onwards and white is backwards or something. I don't know, but they are quite specific. So it was to do with cars not getting into cars and people not getting into, but mainly cars not getting into into the rain gardens. I mean, we have quite high curves. I don't think they will get into the rain gardens anyway, but we were kind of almost like encouraged to use them. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure there are I've seen rain gardens in New York where they have small ornamental fences, but on the sides, but that's more to do with pedestrians not going into the rain gardens. In terms of that, what we did is that we had a lot of consultation with Cardiff Council DDA officer to make sure it was DDA compliant, and they were happy because obviously there was a risk of people falling into the rain garden. So what we got them on board, and the advice was just to have a 35 mil upstand on the footpath to make sure that someone like a blind person or a wheelchair had a bit of an upstand to warn them that there is something. But for the general public, they will, because these planters are not in the design lines, they're outside the design lines. It shouldn't be, people shouldn't be, falling into them. So it's about a mix between, making sure the design is reduces the risks by, keeping outside the design lines as well.
Thank you. Do we have time for one more question? If we can get
some
from the students, because students are analyzing the things and they have probably questions. Has anybody have quite some question? Does anybody have question? Hello. Okay, if there are no questions from students, I will ask one more question. And it is you showed quite complex map of the plant selection. Was the local specificity of the plants as well, like I mean the origin of the species, was that considered, or was it more about the properties? And you said you were co-designing with local people as well about their preferences. Can you tell a bit more about that?
Yes. So obviously, the origin of the plants was not the origin, but whether they're native or non-native was very important. But with a caveat. I mean, nowadays all local authorities are like, oh, we just want native species, and I think you need to be careful, because native species are good because they are obviously established, but we have to think about different things. So one is climate change, but then the other one is like some of the species, as you will know, that are native, maybe they don't bring that maximum benefits in terms of biodiversity. So sometimes, if a species is not native, but it has been well established in that location, it's not invasive, and it provides more benefits than a native species, I think there are arguments to actually have a non-native species.
I agree with you, definitely.
So we prioritize. So we had native species as one of the parameters, but we were not, completely constrained about it. Saying that, for the trees, I think most of them, or a lot of them, were native. But we explained that as well in terms of the region. But the other element is also provenance. So where do they come from? And what we always try to do, and I think that's even more important than probably whether they're native or not, is whether they come from a UK nursery or not. Because we've seen a lot of issues recently on plants coming from other countries and bringing disease. So now, for instance, with oak, you can't bring, I think, oaks from outside the UK because of specific disease on the oak. So that's something, we were quite adamant to use a UK nursery, and we got into, we got early engagement with the UK nursery. We went to the nursery to select the trees and tag them. And I think that's was very important that, we had the chance to do that, rather than the nursery sending the trees they think are best, because I think it's good to go, you can go there and select them. So we did that, and that was a good thing. But in terms of biodiversity, I mean, I could, if you want to send more questions, I'll be more than happy to answer them. I'm sure I missed quite a few things. We work with our ecologist team as well. I didn't mention that, which help us, give us advice on many aspects. So for instance, one of them was all of the new manholes that we have amphibian ladders. So like sometimes on these manholes, if you have an amphibian falling in, it might get trapped. So they put some, I think it's called amphibian ladder. It's basically a small kit that allows them to actually get out of those manholes, manholes and gullies. So we've installed amphibian ladders in every galley, or a new galley, and I think existing ones as well, of the project, which meant that you are allowing those amphibians to be in that habitat. So I think there's quite a lot of elements about ecology that we could bring more info if you wanted. So feel free to send more questions. I'll be happy to either answer them or get my colleagues to answer them.
Thank you so much. That's very kind of you. And
no worries.
That's a very fast question.
Yeah.
Well.
And
yeah.
I have a question. And is there some future plan of this project later years?
So yes, there are. When I showed the first plan, I think I show like the area of focus, and then the early feasibility was looking at actually a much bigger area. Now they're thinking of the phase 2 of Grangetown, which will be a kind of northern area of the ward. They've been looking at that from the local authority level. We haven't had anything concrete yet, but I think they're looking into it. So that could be one. But then there are other projects in Wales that are looking into doing very similar things and already doing some of them. So yeah, it is definitely something that we will be seeing much more of this, because one thing I didn't mention this, but last year a new legislation in Wales came across, which meant now that basically any impermeable surface, new impermeable surface that you create as a development, that is more than 100 square meters, has to treat all the water, all the surface water, through a sustainable drainage, through a SuDS or similar. And that means that now a lot of new developers, all of the new developments have to comply with this. And we're getting a lot of kind of questions and a lot of potential work from that, because they're going to have to retrofit green infrastructure or create new green infrastructure connected to sustainable drainage as part of their developments. So we're going to see much more of this, especially in Wales, because of this new legislation.
That's really great. Thank you.
Okay, and as we students focus on the module called Analysis of Precedent, but you have so many details of the project. So what we're gonna do in the future, and I want to get your some advice or some suggestions. For example, if we could analyze some the precedent of now, the trees or some infrastructures, they're now or compared to the they had just complete the construction.
Right. So we're saying is like, yeah, that you would like to offer some other, like, no, sorry. What you're trying to say is like, through your work, you might come up with other solutions, yeah, or proposals, and then maybe that you can discuss those with me. Is that what you trying to say?
No, I think we module is just to analyze the precedent.
Yeah.
But you can bring up suggestions and share them, definitely. I mean, that's part of, we are active on the area, and obviously you analyze, so you might say this didn't work as expected. Maybe this solution could work better or something.
Yeah.
I mean, it would be great to share your work with Juan and.
Yeah, no, I think that would be great. As I said, like, I'm happy to get questions, and then if suggestions for improvements, send them through, and we can discuss them or have a call or whatever. That I'm more than happy to do that. And then I'll try to find out who is doing this research, because I know like someone at the uni is doing a research on the scheme, more to do with data about air quality, water quality, etc. But I'll try to find out who's doing that, and if it's Cardiff Uni, I mean, you might be able to get in touch, and I'm sure they'll have a lot of information to share.
Okay, there are Marie.
Yeah.
He can send to you or Hazar or me.
Yeah.
I can send to Marie, and then you do it that way.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Juan. I will close this session, but thank you so much. It was really great. And it's very much appreciated for our work. So thank you, and let's